Masechet Shevuot, Daf Yod Bet. On the previous daf, we saw the statement of Rabbah following Rabbi Yochanan, that if you have an animal that was consecrated, set aside for a communal offering, like for a Korban Tamid, and then it went unused, it was left over, and now it's already the next fiscal year after Rosh Chodesh Nisan. All you have to do is take this animal and you can redeem it for money. Even if it's not blemished, you don't have to wait till it gets blemished, you don't have to let it die, but you can simply redeem it. And the question is, how can you do that? Where does the Kedusha go? You could just, a consecrated animal, you just redeem it just like that. Intrinsic holiness, Kedusha Taguf. Rabbah's explanation was that there is an implicit condition given by the Bet Din that when the Kohanim make something sanctified in the first place, it's on condition. If it will be used for a Korban, then yes, it has Kedushat Haguf, it will be used for whatever it was designated for, Korban Olah, and so on. But if it's not used, if it's extra and left over from the previous year, then it has only Kedushat Damim. And since it has only monetary holiness, that is easily transferred to money. So that was Rabbah's claim. Now we have a challenge to that. Itibeh. Amru lo l'Rabbi Shimon. Ma'u shikrebu zeh bazeh. Amar lo yikrebu. Amru lo. Hoil ve'en kaparatan shavah. He'achen kerebin. Amar lehen. Kulan ba'in lechaper al tumat mikdash ve'kadashav. The challenge to Rabbah is from the opening Mishnah all the way back on Daf Bet, where we saw, here it is on Daf Bet, the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. He said that each of the different types of Seirim, from Rosh Chodesh, from Yom Tov, from Yom Kippur, atone for different categories of sin. Rabbi Yehuda said the same thing up over here. Rabbi Yehuda said different categories. They disagree precisely what it is. Rabbi Meir said that they overlap. All the different types of Seirim can atone for all the different types of Tumat and Kadashav. Anyway, back to Rabbi Shimon, who says that there is a division of labor. Here, Amru lo, some rabbis asked him. We'll see in a second who those rabbis asked, who it is that asked him these questions. But here's a dialogue. So here it is in the Mishnah, and we quote it here again precisely, so let's review it. So they said to Rabbi Shimon, can you take a goat that was designated for one holiday and use it for something else? It was designated, let's say, for Yom Kippur, to be a sa'ir for Musaf, but then sa'ir khatat, but then you didn't use it then, and you want to use it for a Yom Tov. Can you do so? And Rabbi Shimon said, yes, you could abuse, no problem. But they asked him, but since they atone for different things, how can you just switch one for the other? According to you, Rabbi Shimon, each one has a division of labor. Each type of sa'ir atones for something else. So if it was designated for Yom Kippur, then it should only be able to be used for that type of atonement, that category. How can you use it for something else? Amarlin kulan ba'in lechaper al tumat mikdash v'kadashav. And Rabbi Shimon says it's okay because they all have in common that they come to atone for different types of tumah that come into the Bet HaMikdash. Someone tameh comes to Bet HaMikdash or eats sacrificial food while tameh. Since they're all coming for this category, even though there's a subdivision of Yom Kippur is for this, Yom Tov is for that, but since they're all within the same general category, they are interchangeable, and you could use the Sayyid for one instead of another. That's Rabbi Shimon's answer. And here is the challenge against Abaye, against Rabbah, by Abaye. Ve'amai, lema lebetin matnea lehen. Why did Rabbi Shimon have to answer this, that they're all part of the same general category, even though they have some different subcategories? He could have answered more simply, if Rabbah is right, and said that the Betin has an implicit condition, and said that, listen, if you can use it for this, then it's designated for that, and it has Kedushat Haguf. Otherwise, it's not Kedushat Tamim. If the Bet Din makes such a designation, such a condition, then it would be easy to say that it can be used for some. If it's not used for this, you can even redeem it. So certainly you can go and use it for a different holiday. Why didn't Rabbi Shimon answer that simply? He didn't, because it seems that he doesn't agree that there is a condition. And we answer, Rabbi Shimon, kamat Rabbi Shimon, let le betin matnea lehen. Oh, you're asking from Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon does not think that the betin makes a condition. And Rabbah was following the other opinions in the Mishnah that said that there is a condition. But Rabbi Shimon himself, no, he would not say that the Bet Din has any implicit condition. How do we know that? Tamar Rav Idi bar Abin Amar Rav Amram Amar Rabbi Yochanan Timidim shelo husrichu lasibur ledivrei Rabbi Shimon en niftin timimim ledivrei Chachamim niftin timimim. Because we have tradition in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that if you have a korban tamid and it was not used, it was not needed for communal use, according to Rabbi Shimon, you cannot redeem it while it is unblemished. You'd have to wait till it gets blemished and then redeem it after, but you can't simply redeem it while it's blemished. So you see that according to Rabbi Shimon, there is no condition given by the Bet Din. If there were a condition, then he would agree with Chachamim, would say that you can redeem it while it's tamim. So that is the answer to the question we asked against Rabbah. Wait, Rabbi Shimon doesn't seem to have the condition. You're right, Rabbi Shimon doesn't have the condition. But the other sages, Chachamim, do have such an implicit condition according to Rabbah. Good. Now that we quoted that, we ask, who are these other sages that disagree with Rabbi Shimon and say that if you have a communal offering that's unused, then you can redeem it right away while it's unblemished. That would imply that it's because of a condition. What's the identity of these sages? Maybe it's the same sages as the authors of the Mishnah that we quoted earlier yesterday from Mishnah Shekalim 4:5 regarding Ketoret that said, let's say there's leftover Ketoret from the previous year, so you could do this 4-way transaction and end up redeeming the holiness of the Ketoret, and then you buy it back with new funds. So maybe it's that the same sages, because just like you can redeem Ketoret, so too you can redeem a sacrificial animal. So is that the author? And we say, no, not necessarily, because Shane Ketoret la bar re'iyahi. Maybe Ketoret is different from an animal, because an animal, you can let it go graze. You have an unblemished, holy animal that you designated, but now you're not using. So let it graze, and it will get a blemish eventually. It'll scratch itself against something or break its leg or whatever, and then you can redeem it. But Ketoret, what are you going to do? You're going to leave it in the jar. It's not going to get a blemish. It doesn't move. It doesn't do anything. So maybe the authors of that Mishnah of Ketoret would say yes regarding Ketoret, because nothing's going to happen to it. So we have to allow a person to redeem it. So we do this transaction, and that way you can redeem it. But an animal, we don't have to redeem it while it's unblemished. We can let it graze until it gets a blemish. So they're not necessarily the authors. Dilma Shane Para de Dameh Yekarin. Maybe it's the authors of the statement that we said regarding Para Duma that said that if something happens to Para, you can redeem it, even if you find a better one. There's nothing wrong with this Para, it doesn't get a blemish, it's still alive, it's perfectly fine Para Duma, but you found a nicer one, so you can take the old one and redeem it. Whoa, how could you redeem it? It must be that there's a condition of Bet Din, and they would be the authors of this Chachamim over here that says you niftim timimim. So maybe they are they are identified as the Rabbanan. And we answer no, not necessarily, because the case of Paraduma is different, because the Paraduma is very expensive, more expensive than a regular animal, and we don't want to cause people financial loss. So maybe that's why the Rabbanan there say, okay, you can redeem the Paraduma if you find a better one, but they wouldn't necessarily say it in any other case. Ve'ela Rabbanan de Amirulo. So now we hypothesize that the Rabbanan in this Baraita over here that says the Divrei Chachamim Niftin Timimim are the same as whoever asked the question against Rabbi Shimon, right? And they said Amru Lo, and they asked him that question. At this point, we're assuming that the rabbis who ask Rabbi Shimon a question, the Amru Lo, there is in fact Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda, like Rabbi Shimon, thinks that there is a division of labor, that each of the Seirim for the holidays, for Rosh Chodesh, Yom Kippur, serve different purposes. And yet Rabbi Yehuda says, hey, according to you, Rabbi Shimon, why do you think that one can interchange them, and if you didn't use it for Yom Kippur, you could still use it for Yom Tov? For me, Rabbi Yehuda is telling him, I think it's okay because there is a condition. But for you, Rabbi Shimon, you don't think that the Bet Din makes a condition, so how can you interchange one for the other? And since Rabbi Yehuda would be coming from that perspective, it must be that Rabbi Yehuda is the one that says that the Bet Din makes a condition, and they would be identified with the Chachamim here that say Niftin Temimim, that which is what Rabbi Yochanan said, that you can redeem an animal that's not used even if it's not blemished. So now we are trying to identify it with Rabbi Yehuda, but we reject this too. Rabbi Yehuda v'chikamar le bishlamar ledidida mina lebetin matneh lehen ametu lehachi yikrebu ela ledidach damat la v'amai yikrebu. Wait, how do you know that the sages who said Amru Law is in fact identified with Rabbi Yehuda? And he would be saying as follows, it's fine according to me, because I think that the Bet Din makes an implicit condition on the animals that they consecrate, and then therefore if it's not used, it's only Kedushat Damim. And that's why you can use it from one to the other. From it's designated for one holiday, you can interchange it with another holiday. But according to you, that you don't think that there is a condition, why do you think that it can be sacrificed? So if we followed that it was Rabbi Yehuda, then we understand this would make sense. And that is possible. The problem is it's not necessarily so. Maybe the sages challenging Rabbi Shimon and saying Amru Law is in fact Rabbi Meir, and he thinks that there's no division of labor. All the Sirim can serve all the different functions and cover the types of categories of sins. It makes sense according to me because Rabbi Meir says, I think that all the Sirim serve the same atonements, and that's why they can be offered as sacrifices. But according to you, that there's a division of labor, why do you think that you can exchange and use one for that was designated from Yom Kippur and use it for Yom Tov? And therefore, the rabbis who said Amru might be Rabbi Meir and not Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, we don't have a conclusive idea of identification of who the Chachamim are. Ela Rabbi Yochanan Gemara Gamir La Rabbi Shimon and Niftin Rabbi Chachamim Niftin. Rather, Rabbi Yochanan had an independent tradition that's not recorded elsewhere, so we can't verify who the Chachamim are, but Rabbi Yochanan has this tradition from the times of the Tanaim that according to Rabbi Shimon, we do not redeem an animal that was not used at all. Then, even though Rabbi Shimon says, yes, you can, if you didn't use it for Yom Kippur, you can use it for something else, for Yom Tov, that year. But if you didn't use it that year, then you cannot redeem it. That's Rabbi Shimon's opinion, because he doesn't think that there is a condition. But according to Chamim, they think that the Bet Din did make a condition, and therefore one can redeem it, even if not blemished. Rabbi Shimon dedet le Bet Din matneh lehen mai avdin lehu. Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak now qualifies what we just said in the name of Rabbi Shimon. While it's true that Rabbi Shimon says that if you have a korban olah that you designated as a korban olah and then didn't use, and then you want to use it next year, you can use it as filler. You could use that very animal and don't do anything with it. It's tamim. You can offer it as a korban olah. That's true. However, Rabbi Shimon agrees that if the animal was designated originally as a sa'ir lechatat for Rosh Chodesh or for Yom Tov, and then you didn't end up using it, then you cannot sacrifice that very animal as a korban olah. Rather, you have to let it graze till it gets blemished, and then you can sell, then you can redeem it, sell it for money, and with that money, you can buy a new animal designated as a korban olah, and use that new korban olah animal for kayitz to put on the mizbeach as filler while the mizbeach is idle. So what's the difference between korban olah, that you can use the very same animal, and the sir hatat, that you cannot use the same animal and you have to let it graze and then buy a new one with the money after you sell it? The answer is hachahu demekara olah v'hashta olah. If it was originally an olah and it's still an olah, that's totally fine. And in fact, midoraita, even if it was originally a seir chatat, you can still, and you didn't end up using it, you could use it as an olah. However, there's a gezerah. Aval hatam demekara chatat v'hashta olah, gezerah lachar kapara atu lifnei chapara. When it was originally designated as a chatat offering, and now you want to use it as an olah, really that would be technically okay from the letter of the law. But the rabbis make a gezerah that you can't do that after the fact of atonement, because you may do that before atonement. In other words, after atonement is, we designated this to be used for Rosh Chodesh. But then we had another one, and this is extra. We didn't end up using it. Okay, so now this is after atonement was already achieved, and so this is extra. We don't really need it. So really you could use it for Korban Olah. But we're worried if we allow you to use the Korban Chatat for Korban Olah after a replacement was already offered, then person might mistakenly think that's always permitted. And even before the korban, even before atonement was achieved for whatever the thing that korban chatat was designated for, even before atonement was achieved, you might change your mind, say, no, I designate it as a chatat offering for something I did, a personal offering, or for a communal offering for an upcoming holiday, but now I want to change it, I want to make it a korban olah. You might think that that's allowed, but that's not allowed before atonement. So therefore, the rabbis say it's not permitted to use it after atonement because you might get confused with using it also before atonement. Amar Abaye, afanana mitanena, parves Yom Kippurim shavdu v'frish acherim tachtehem, v'chen sireh o avodah zara shavdu v'frish acherim tachtehen, kulan yamutu diber Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon omrim yir'u ad shista'avu, v'machiru yipilu demehel lindava, shen chatat tzibur meta, ve'amai, nikrebu inu gufayhu olah, el alav shemamina, Next, we're going to see a few statements that agree with this same principle, and Abaye has one, based on the Braita that we already learned, that said that if you have a pod or a sa'ir designated for Yom Kippur, and then they got lost, we don't know what happened to them. So the Kohanim get a replacement ones, another pod and a sa'ir, and they sacrifice those instead. And then the original ones are found. Or another case, if there's a communal sin offering for Avodah Zarah, a sa'ir, and they got lost, and then they designated new ones and brought the new ones, and then the original ones were found, what do we do with the new ones? Then, so Rabbi Yehuda says, we let them die. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon says, no, you don't have to let them die. You can let them graze until they get a blemish and then sell them. And then you can use the money for Korban Nedava. Why do you have to do that? Because a Korban Chatat that was designated for a communal offering, which all of these are, either for Yom Kippur or for a Sa'ir of Avodah as a communal offering, they should not die. Rather, you let them graze until they get a blemish. That's why Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. Says, no, don't let it die, rather let it graze. Now, all the opinions agree that you don't use that very sa'ir or a pod that was designated as a chatat. You don't just use it as an olah. Why not? Why not sacrifice them themselves as an olah? You can't sacrifice them as a chatat because atonement was already brought. You can't bring a voluntary korban chatat. One can only bring korban chatat if there was a sin, or if it's a holiday that requires a korban chatat. So you can't bring his korban chatat, but why not bring it as an olah? It should be permitted, as we said before, according to the letter of the law. If atonement was already achieved by another animal, which it was here because you had replacements, then the korban chatat should be able to change into a korban olah and use it for an extra offering. But yet, all the opinions here say you don't do that. Either you let it die or you let it graze until it gets a blemish. What can we learn from here? Abaye says we can learn that the rabbis made a gezerah not to use a chatat for an olah after atonement is achieved, because you may confuse and think even before atonement is achieved, you can change your mind and say, I know I designated as a chatat, I was going to use it for Yom Kippur, and the Yom Kippur didn't come yet. But I want to change my mind. I want to use it for Korban Olah. Before atonement is achieved, before Yom Kippur, you wouldn't be able to do that. But if you already designated replacements and used the replacements, then afterwards, from a letter of law, be allowed. But the Gezerah says it's not allowed because you might confuse it from before. Amar Rava, afanana metenena, v'asheni yir'ai ad shista'ev v'imachel v'pilu tamav l'indaba, v'amai yikrab ihu gufe ola, ela lav shema mina gezerah har kapara tu lifnei kapara. Rava says, I have a baraita also that supports the same law that there is such a gezerah. Because in this, it's a Mishnah actually, that says, let's say the Kohen Gadol, he made a lottery, and it says this two seirim, one is Azazel, one is for Hashem. But then one of them got lost, either one. Let's say the Azazel got lost. What are we going to do? Now we have one without a partner. So what you have to do is you have to do a lottery again. The one that was already designated Hashem remains Hashem. But then you bring two more and you do another lottery. And then whichever one is chosen to be La Azazel in that lottery will get paired up with the original Korban LaHashem. So now you have the pair that you're actually going to use, the one from the first lottery and one from the second lottery. But now you have an extra animal. You have the second from the second pair, the one that was designated LaHashem, is not actually going to be used. So what do you do with it? That's what the Mishnah teaches. Hasheni, the second one, will graze until it gets a blemish, and then it will be sold, and you can use the money for nedava, for extra communal offerings. Now we ask why. Rava says, why not say that korban is designated as a korban chatat? So use it as a korban olah instead. Why not? You have one that's already going to be used for the chatat LaHashem. So after that, then you can use this one for an extra olah. Use this very animal. Why make it graze and get a blemish? Rather, you see that there is a gezerah not to do that, because you might make a mistake and think that just like after the atonement was achieved, you can use a chatat for an olah. You might think that even before atonement is achieved, you can use a chatat as an olah. And that's not true. So we see that gezerah is built into this law of the Mishnah. Amar Ravina, Ravina says, I also have a Mishnah that supports this gezerah. It says in Masechet Temura, Asham shemetu be'alav o shenitkaperu be'alav yir'ai ad sheyistev yimacher v'pilu damav lindaba dibre Rabbi indaba. Rabbi Eliezer omer yamut. Rabbi Yoshua omer yavi bedamav ola. So the Mishnah says three opinions, but they're all similar. If you have a korban asham, someone did a sin and it has to bring a korban asham. He designates an animal to be a korban asham and then he dies. What are you going to do with this korban? The children, the inheritors, can't bring it as a korban asham, because you can't bring an animal as a korban asham or chatat after the owner dies. So what do? There's three opinions. Tanakama says, let it graze until it gets a blemish, sell it, and then use with the proceeds, you can buy a korban as a voluntary offering. That's Tanakama. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, let the animal die. Rabbi Yoshua says, you can bring a korban olah. The owner can bring a korban olah, which is different, but he sells it. Again, he lets it graze, get a blemish, sells it, and the owner can bring korban olah. That's different from Tanakama. Tanakama says the community does. You get a communal offering. Rabbi Yoshua says an individual offering. But the point is that all three opinions do not think that you could use this asham korban itself as a korban olah. So we ask, why not? V'likrab hagufa olah. Why not use this very animal as a korban olah? Can't be used for an asham anyway anymore. Elalav gezerah lachar kapara atu lifnei kapara shema mina. Rather, we learn that there is a gezerah. Just like before one gets atonement, you can't just take an asham animal and now use it as a korban olah. So too after, even though from the letter of the law would be permitted, we're afraid if we allow you to do it after, then you might think it's also permitted before. Tanya namehachi mahen mevi'in min hamotarot. And there is another baraita that supports this ruling, that if we had a sa'ir, then we will sell it and buy with it a korban olah, because we have a baraita that says, what do we do with the extra? If we understand the word surplus here to mean surplus funds, that we have the sa'ir and now it's not usable anymore, so we'll let it graze and sell it, and then we have have extra funds, what do we do with those funds? Well, we'll buy a korban olah, and then kayitz, kibinot shuach lamizbeach. They will be dessert, like white figs for the altar. In other words, just like white figs are delicious, and they are a dessert for us after we finish eating a meal, it's nice to have some figs. So too, the extra korban olah that we will buy with it will be dessert. That's literally what kayitz means. In fact, kayitz, that means the summer, is called that because that's when the figs ripen, and so it's called the kayitz, the time for dessert of figs, and that is for the mizbeach. It has its regular meals of korban todah and musaf, required things, and then these will be the extra dessert. Now we ask about that. The pasuk says you're not allowed to bring leavening or honey. When it says devash, we're talking about date honey or other sweet fruits like figs. So you're not allowed to put figs. So what do you mean that you're going to put figs on the mizbeach? And the answer is no. It's not literally figs. It means Taneh Rav Chanina kibinot shuach le'adam, is making an analogy. Just like figs are dessert for human beings, so too those added korban olaz are like dessert for the mizbeach. Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda en mekayesin be'olat ha'of. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda taught in a public lecture that we do not bring these desserts on the mizbeach from birds. When you have extra funds like this, you buy an animal and sacrifice it as an olah, and you do not buy a bird and make it a korban olah from a bird. Amar Rava ha burcha. Rava says this is absurd. What do you mean? Why not? Why can't you use a bird? Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rava mai buchreta. And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to Rava, why are you saying this law is for the birds? Why are you saying this is absurd? There's nothing wrong with this law. It makes total sense that you'd bring a korban olah, that as a communal offering, a voluntary extra, and you'd bring it from animals only and not birds. Why? Ana amritani haleh umishmehed Rav Shimi min harde amritani haleh damar Rav Shimi min hardea motarot lenidvat sibur azle ven olat off besibur. I said this law in front of Rav Nachman, and I said it in the name of Rav Shimi min hardea, as he says that surplus funds from other korbanot that you didn't use, you will use as a voluntary communal offering, a korban olah, from an animal. And you don't use a bird because there actually is no bird communal olah offering in the Torah. Whenever it has an offering of a korban olah that's required for the community, you don't bring it from a bird. Only an individual who wants to bring a korban olah can bring a bird, but not a communal offering. So since there's no example of a required communal offering from birds, therefore we're also not going to make a voluntary communal offering from birds, but rather only from animals. V'af Shemuel sabar lehad Rabbi Yochanan damar Rav Yehuda amar Shemuel korbanot tzibur sakin moshachtan lema shehen. And now we're going to bring further support for what Rabbi Yochanan said. There's some controversy about which statement of Rabbi Yochanan we're talking about because he said a number of things, but a simple explanation is that he's referring to the law of Rabbi Shimon that says if you don't use a korban for one purpose, you can use it for a different purpose, like a seir lechatat that was brought for Rosh Chodesh, you can still bring for Yom Tov and so on. As Shemuel said, regarding communal offerings, it's the knife that pulls them to what they're going to be. In other words, you designate this thing to be a communal offering. Oh, very good. It's going to be a sa'id for something. But what particularly it will be for is not finally decided until the knife comes and slaughters the animal. Only at that point, when you slaughter the animal, let's say on Rosh Chodesh, as a sa'id for Rosh Chodesh, then that defines it. That's only going to be for Rosh Chodesh. It's already slaughtered for that. But before it's slaughtered, it remains as a generality, and that animal can be, if not used for this, it can be used for something else. Tanya Nameachi is a braita that supports that. Umodeh Rabbi Shimon Besair, Shim lo kara beregel yikra berosh chodesh, v'im lo kara berosh chodesh yikra b'yom kippurim, v'im lo kara b'yom kippurim yikra beregel, v'im lo kara beregel ze yikra beregel acher, shem metechilato lo ba ela lechaper al mizbeach hachison. Braita supports this because it says that Rabbi Shimon agrees regarding a sa'ir, a goat that's designated to be a korban hatat, as for the community, if you designated it to be on a holiday, but then you didn't end up using it for this holiday, you could use it next on Rosh Chodesh. And if you didn't use it on Rosh Chodesh, you could use it on Yom Kippur. And if you didn't bring it on Yom Kippur, you could bring it on the next holiday, whatever, Sukkot. And if you didn't bring it on this holiday, you could bring it on the next holiday. Why? Because when it was designated to be atonement on the outer altar. So yeah, that's a generality. It's going to be on the outer altar as opposed to for Yom Kippur on the inner altar. That's a special thing that you bring the two sirim and goralot. But for anything that's going to be on the outer altar, and all of these are brought on the outer altar, and they're all korban hatat, that's going to be for atonement, so that you designate it to be that. So then you can't use it for something else completely, but as long as it's going to be used as a korban chatat and sprinkled on the outer altar, then you can decide on the spot when you slaughter it what holiday it will be for. Tana, lo ukdash ela lechaper al mizbeach hachison. Another Braita says the same thing, that when one designates such an animal, it becomes consecrated as atonement on the outer altar, but as long as it goes as a korban chatat on the outer altar, it doesn't really matter which Rosh Chodesh or holiday you actually use it for. Ve'al zedon tumat mikdash ve'kadashav sa'ira na'asa bifnim ve'chule minahane mileh. The next part of the Mishnah, we can go back and look at it inside. It was all the way back on Daf Bet, said that regarding intentional defiling of the mikdash or of sacrificial food, someone did it intentionally, one can still get atonement through the sa'ir of Yom Kippur that is sprinkled inside and the essence of the day of Yom Kippur itself. Now we ask, what's the source? The answer is the Tanu Rabbanan, V'chiper al hakodesh mittumot b'nei Yisrael. The full pasuk is here, that Yom Kippur and all of its services will atone for the kodesh, mitumot, from the tumah b'nei Israel. So the tumah and associated with kodesh, and it adds umipishahem lechol hatotam. So what do those words mean? Pesha and hatat. Peshaim elu ha-meradim v'chen homer melech moab pashabi ve'omer az tifsha libna ba'et tahi. Peshaim is referring to rebellious acts. That is a sin that one commits on purpose, as we see in two pesukim. One is from this pasuk in Melachim, where King Yehoram of Israel says to King Yoshaphat of Yehuda, the king of Moab rebelled against me. That means on purpose. And another pasuk in Melachim that says Libna rebelled at that time. So Pesha is a purposeful sin. Chataot elu ashigagot v'chen omer nefesh ki techeta bishkaga. And chet is associated with something that one does unwittingly. As it says, if a person does a chet, bishkaga. So you see, bishkaga clearly means by mistake, and that's associated with the word chet. Chet also means if you're shooting an arrow, lahati et hamatara, to miss the target. Well, that's by mistake. You're aiming at something, but you missed. You weren't so careful. So that's the same thing. You tried to do the right thing, and then you were somewhat negligent, and you did the wrong thing. So that's called a chet, but that's by mistake. And so from here we see that regarding tum'ah that's brought into the mikdash, whether by mistake or on purpose, that's why it's pesha and chet. Those are both atoned for by the sa'ir inside and Yom Kippur itself. The Mishnah continues. Let's look at the full statement inside. It says regarding all other sins in the Torah, whether it's something lenient or stringent, zedonot or shigagot, on purpose or by mistake, hoda velo hoda, known or unknown, aseh velo taseh, positive or negative commandment, karetot mitot betin, sir mashtalech mechaper, whether it's something that would obligate one, make one liable to karet or death by a court, human court. For all these sins, the sa'ir that goes sent out into Azazel will achieve atonement. We ask about that. Hainu kalot, hainu aseh v'lo ta'aseh. Chamorot, hainu keretot u'mitot betin. Hoda, hainu mezid, lo hoda, hainu shogeg. We don't understand all of the distinct categories that are listed in the Mishnah, because when you say kalot, isn't that referring to misvot aseh, misvot lo ta'aseh, that don't have a stringent punishment, whereas chamurot, stringent laws, that's referring to something that would make one liable to karet or capital punishment in the hands of a court. So why say kalot and also say why say chamurot and also say karet mitat betin? And furthermore, hoda, something that you know about, doesn't that mean that you did it on purpose? And you didn't know about, isn't that the same as doing it by mistake? So why are you repeating the categories, just using different words? Amar Rav Yehuda, hachi ka'amar. Rav Yehuda says this is how to read the Mishnah, as it's in terms of generalities and particulars. It gives the general category and then it explains the particulars after that. So it's not overlapping, it's just general and then giving you the details of what that generality meant. Al sha'ar avirot shebat Torah, ben kalot, ben chamurot, ben sha'asan b'shogeg, ben sha'asan b'mezid. So that gives the general categories, whether it's a light or a heavy sin, whether you did it by mistake or on purpose. Otan sha'asan b'shogeg, ben noda lo sefekan, ben lo noda lo sefekan. When it comes to sefek, there's a subcategory within sefek, whether it became known to you or it didn't become known to you. You're not sure if you did it, and you found out that you definitely did, or you never found out. So that makes sense. That's a subcategory. That's what it means hoda and la, not hoda. So those are not overlapping categories. That's a subcategory within shogeg. Velo en kalot, aseh velo taseh, velo en chamurot, karetot umitot betin. And we mentioned kalot. You want to know what the kalot are? That includes any aseh and lo taseh that don't have a particularly stringent punishment. And chamurot, that refers to any sin that would make one liable to karet or mitot betin. So now we understand all of the categories in the Mishnah, and on the next stop we'll further analyze this part of the Mishnah. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.